Welcome to the Eye for an Eye podcast. We're your hosts. That's Mo Riley, and I am Brooklyn Taylor. What's going on, Mo?
Hey, man, what's crack-a-lacking, baby boy? What's good?
Today, our topic is who can't hear must feel. That's Jamaican patois. Who cannot hear must feel. It is said, if you have Jamaican parents, if you are Jamaican, if you grew up around Jamaicans, maybe some other parts of the Caribbean, or if you've been warned in this fashion, you've heard who can't hear must feel. So let me break it down. Actions have consequences. And when you might be a child, you might be an adult, but there have been times in your life when you've been warned. Hey, don't go over there, or this is going to happen. Don't do this. Don't touch the hot stove. Don't play in traffic. Don't tease dogs. Whatever the case may be. Who cannot hear must feel. They warned you not to, you're in a foreign country. This has happened to Marines. We're Marines, as you know, if you've ever watched this show for 5 seconds. How do you know somebody's into CrossFit or they're a Marine? They're going to tell you. Or they're a Jamaican, they're going to tell you, right? So who can't hear must feel is something everybody heard growing up if they were Jamaican. And it's another way of saying, if you ignore my advice, if you don't do the right thing, then you're going to feel the consequences, right? And that's just true in life. So it is a classic Jamaican proverb: who cannot hear must feel. And there are many. Everyone, if they think hard enough, they can think of times when they were warned not to do something, or warned that something might not work out, and they felt those consequences. Do you have any experience in that realm, Mo? Or, as a dad, do you have any experience, warning your kids or warning your colleagues about something and them not listening, and then them getting bit by the proverbial, monster?
Man, I have been on both sides of this particular phrase. As a kid, my mother would warn me about things like, don't hang around with them boys. Them boys ain't gonna be right. And sure enough, all of them were either dead or in jail at one point. You know what I mean? And because I listened, I had but there's been plenty of times when I ain't listened to my mama. There's been plenty of times when I didn't listen to my dad. You know what I mean? I grew up in the church. And there was a scripture that was similar to this, which said, Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And I used to always hear that. My mama used to always be like, okay, now pride come before the fall. And I used to be like, man, it's not gonna happen to me, because I'm a little bit smarter and I got a little bit more technology that surrounds me, and I'm gonna do better. And it ain't gonna happen to me. We all say that, though. In our pure ignorance, we always think that it's not going to happen to me. But somehow, some way, it always happens to you, man. And as a parent, man, I don't know how many times you got to tell a child to keep their hand away from the stove before they finally learn it. So, biggest culprit. Right. So now I don't even say it. I'm like, go ahead. I don't even say, hey, don't do that. You know what I say? Go ahead and burn yourself. That's what I say now. Go ahead and do it. I double dog dare you. You know what I'm saying? But luckily I got a good bunch of kids, and they usually tend to heed warnings, but they normally don't, man. But shout out to you, dog. Let me just say, off rip, before we even get started and get too deep on this, your background is dope as hell, dog.
Oh, I appreciate that. That
speaks to me. You know what it says to me? It says that we got money, we got classic cars, classic European cars, but we are not too good to stop and get an all-star breakfast, dog, at Waffle House, dog. That's what it says. I don't need caviar and eggs when I could just doggone go in there and get me some steak and eggs from Waffle House at 3 o'clock in the morning. Real talk.
That's funny. Yeah, the Waffle House is a tradition among my car crew. We try to always stop at Waffle House. We park the classic BMWs outside and we hang out, whatever time of night it is. A couple nights before the car show, and you just can't go wrong with some Waffle House. Shout out to Waffle House. We're accepting all sponsorships, but it's you can't go wrong. It's always a good time, or a horrible adventure. But
well, good on you, man.
Appreciate you.
But a lot of times we hear this, most of the time when you think about this, you always think about it in parenting. You know what I'm saying? But, if you're in the workplace and you don't listen to your mentor or your supervisor, that's another instance where something like this, you will learn your lesson. Don't go to HR with that. You may want to hold on to that and use it later, and then you go to HR anyway, and then HR laughs you right out of the doggone room or out of the building, It's always good. Now, I'm not saying to listen to everything everybody says all of the time. Right. You kind of got to use a level of discernment, but also you got to know who you got around you. Like they always say, married people shouldn't hang around single people because single people going to give you bad married advice. You know what I'm saying? But I will say this, if they're a divorcee, they may know some things that can keep you from getting divorced. So it's always pick and choose, man. You know what I mean? So you got to pick and choose where you get your wisdom from, but try your best to take it from a wise source, man. But I am particularly surprised that this particular idiom has Caribbean roots. Not that, people weren't there, but I always think it's dope because, we're all part of the African diaspora, and knowing that, Black people ended up in Jamaica, and I would even venture to say this particular phrase probably in some way, shape, form, or fashion probably came from Africa. But I do love how Jamaicans say it, you know what I'm saying? Because as I was looking it up, believe it or not, in the 18th and 19th century, Scottish and Irish proverbs actually use this saying, not to the extent that it is said here, but they used it also. And I would venture to say that if it's used in Jamaica, it was used in Africa, which means it's been used since the beginning of time. I can only parents been around since the beginning of time, so I can only see a parent saying, "Hey, let a hard head make a soft behind." You know what I'm saying?
Which is another synonym for the phrase. I think that you're onto something here because we all come from the same place when you go far back enough. So to me, there are these timeless lessons, and who can hear must feel is just one of them, because it those who came before us and those who are more wise than us, or those who have experience in what we're trying to do, can tell you that there's nothing new under the sun. Like, this is what happens when you do that, right? Let's look at something as simple as sports, right? You have a young athlete. They're going to professional sports. What we know about professional sports is that, with very, very few exceptions, people aren't playing their sport for 20 years. They're lucky to get 10. They're lucky to get 5, right? So, but as we spoke about previously, young people often feel immortal. We were 18-year-old Marines. And not only were we 18-year-old Marines, we were 18-year-old Marines from two of the toughest cities in the United States of America. Mo from Detroit, Brooklyn from Brooklyn, right? So we had to survive getting to the point of being young Marines, and then we went through boot camp. We stood on the yellow footprints. We went through 3 months of boot camp. We matriculated that. We graduated boot camp. We went to Marine combat training, and then we went to our schools. And so, at this point, by 19, by 20, you're a young Marine that came from one of the toughest cities, and then you were trained in the world's premier fighting force. And then, and so now you're like, look, I'm only 20, but I'm from here, and I was trained at this, and so I know a certain amount, whatever you want to call it, certain amount of toughness, certain amount of trained skill, and sometimes you're smart enough to be dangerous, right? And so to this day, you find young sailors, Marines, airmen, spacemen, or whatever you call the men and women in the Space Force, Coast Guardsmen and women. These people are like, I'm young, I'm strong. These are the same people that we have to have safety stand downs for because, you're 19 years old and you decide you got a little bit of money, so you need to get the most, a motorcycle that can go 200 miles per hour, even though you've only been riding motorcycles for a couple weeks. So that was the job of your gunnery sergeants and sergeant majors and staff sergeants and sergeants to like, listen, young lad, be careful, don't do this. Don't do that. Don't try to drive drunk. Don't even try, right? Don't try to get a motorcycle that can go 250 miles per hour when you haven't been, you never even owned a motorcycle, right? So, but in many instances, young men and women don't listen because it can't happen to me. We talked about that. You spoke about that in a previous podcast. It can't happen to me, but it can, because
it will.
Anything can happen to almost anybody.
Murphy's Law.
So you really have to heed the warnings, but that part takes wisdom, right? Because when you're a teenager or when you're in your early 20s, you know everything, or the testosterone or the hormones tell you that you know everything, but you don't. So even in order to take full advantage of who cannot hear must feel, you have to have a certain amount of wisdom. And that's nature versus nurture. That's, if your parents were able to instill enough in you to where you think of them or think of what they would do. I mean, I remember, and I tell people this, I remember being a young Marine and thinking about, a decision. It might be a rash decision. You're about to get in a fight. You're about to do something you shouldn't do. You're about to try to, drive 23 hours on 2 hours sleep. I always heard my parents' voices in my head, and that was the hearing part of who can't hear must feel. You don't want to embarrass your family. It's almost a Game of Thrones thing. Like, you don't want to embarrass the family name. So you try to make the best decision, out of the options you have. So I think that it really is universal as far as who can't hear must feel. I think everyone from everywhere has a version of that. And that's probably a good portion of parenting, trying to convince the kid that you don't want to do that. I'm warning you not to do that. So if when I'm not around, you think about that and don't do that, right? Because while you're there telling a toddler not to stick a fork into an electrical outlet, but you also need them to not do that when you turn around.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Brooklyn said a term that I kind of want to explain earlier, and that was a safety stand down, right?
Yeah.
So a safety stand down in the Marine Corps is where they cease all operations and they bring you in and they set up a bunch of training courses and classes to kind of reiterate safety values. Brooklyn and I, we worked on planes. So oftentimes they would shut down operations and bring us in there, and we would have classes where we would discuss maybe, safety on working on a plane. Not only that, but because like Brooklyn said, we were young men, majority of us between the age of 18 and 22, we would oftentimes have courses on things like riding a motorcycle, things like what to do, on the weekends for safety, like don't be out at a certain time. We would have sexual harassment courses. We would have all kind of courses just to kind of reset and remind us, because what can happen is you can get into a rhythm, and as you do things and you get so used to doing things that you begin to get what we call complacent, which means now you're not paying as much attention. So what would happen is they would cease operations, they would sit down and kind of refresh you and give you a reminder of be careful what you're doing, because this stuff affects lives. What you do saves lives. When the grunts are out there in the field, one of the best sounds they could ever hear is a helicopter come boop, 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 boop over, because then they knew that meant that they had support, or maybe it was coming to get them out of a hot spot, a LZ. Maybe it was, maybe they were under fire in an LZ and they had
landing zone.
Right, landing zone, but all of these things, we take a pause away from every day and we just sit down and remind ourselves and remind each other that you have to be cognizant of safety in every aspect of life. Because you see those 3 BMWs behind, all it takes is Brooklyn going as fast as that thing can go while listening to the best Jay-Z song and not really paying attention before it could all be over, Yeah. So, but, you made some very great points, man, about it. And it's so funny how different generations listen different and they react different. Back, when I was a kid, your parents usually were very frank and straightforward with you. And because they were like that, I was more inclined to listen because things usually sounded a lot harsher. But now we're in this modern age where, you literally can't say things as straightforward as you want to. You tend to want to beat around the bush. The lessons aren't being learned as good as they possibly could, or they're not taking root like we would desire them to do in our youth. But I honestly think that our youth are listening. They're just not listening right now. Our goal is to get them to always listen, and listen when we're not even speaking. That's the hope, because like Brooklyn said, he hears his parents' voice whenever he's doing something. Me, I hear my own voice. I used to be like, God, is that you? And maybe it was just you, speaking to me through my voice. Or maybe it was some recollection of my dad speaking to me, but I hear it in my voice, because just like in your imagination, or in your own mind, you're hearing things, and you're hearing it in a voice that you can recognize. But, this is a very straightforward phrase. It is, to me, it's really not teaching. It literally is a warning that if you do not hear me, you will feel it, whatever that it is.
Right.
If you listen to the warning.
That goes for corporal punishment, right? Sometimes you can't hear, must feel. It's like, hey, I told you stop trying to kick the neighbor's dog. They ignore that. They kick the neighbor's dog. The dog bites them, or the neighbor's kid pushes them down, or something. There's going to be likely a consequence to that. The cat doesn't like to be touched like that. When you're grabbing the cat has claws, you're going to get scratched. You didn't hear when you were warned, so you feel it. You felt the bite, you felt the scratch, you know,
the burn.
And it could be, you know, there are people who don't listen and they get beat up, right? It's like, you know, it's 20 versus 1, and someone leading the group is like, shut up. But you don't want to shut up because you have an ego and you're like, I don't have to shut up. And then somebody punches you or 20 people punch you. Like there's no end to the times. Court, if you ever watch anything with trials and someone wants to get mouthy with the judge, and the judge is like, if you don't stop these outbursts, I'm going to hold you in contempt. And then the judge, you know, fines them or puts them in, you know, 10 days in jail, and they keep talking. It's like, well, 20 days, well, 30 days.
Right.
You're watching that and you're like, why can't you bring yourself to shut up? But, you know, who can't hear must feel.
And you will feel. But you know what's crazy? Why are we like that? Why do we need pain in order to drive change, man? Why can't, I won't even say some of us, you know, because in the Marine Corps, we have this saying that it's always that 10%. You know what I'm saying? Well, since I've been a civilian and been out of the Marine Corps, I've seen that it's more like 80%. How come 80% of us need pain in order to drive change? Why does it take you losing your last dime before you realize that maybe saving is a good thing? Why does it take hurt in order for people to feel like, what do you think? You alluded to one reason why, and I think that that's ego. But what are some other reasons?
Yeah. I think that pain, the issue is that people run toward pleasure and run away from pain. However, pain is experienced in an unequal intensity from pleasure, right? So that's why, and I think you and I have talked, I don't know if it's on or off podcast, you and I have talked about this before. Social media is a great example of this in real time, almost constantly. Someone posts a picture, right?
Mm-hmm. And
they post a picture and they've got on a red dress. Woman's got on a red dress. Yeah. She posts the picture. 1,000 people say that they like the dress. Slay. Mm-hmm. You go. You know, this is amazing.
Yes,
you're the best. Heart eyes. You know, I've never done this before in my life, so I'm messing the heart up.
Don't start now, bro.
So
don't start now.
So I clearly have not done it. That's not in my wheelhouse. It's my first rodeo. But one person says that dress is ugly, or you're too old to wear that dress, or you know, you don't look nice. And even though 1,000 supportive people said it looks great and that felt good, the pain of a person hating on it is going to be so much more intense that they're almost certainly going to reply to that, or possibly even get in an argument with what might be a bot or a complete stranger. And because that slight hurts way more, you know, one slight hurts more than several accolades. And I think that's part of human nature. That's part of the reticular activation system that humans have. People are triggered in good ways and bad ways. You know, there's just an intensity there, and I think that's why people are I have it written on my fridge that those who are easily offended are easily manipulated, right? And I think we can see that real time playing out across the world. So the thing is, people don't want to listen to anything but their egos and their internal monologue, and the person who might be the most wise in most of what we talked about today is going to be your parents, or even someone, you know, who in your field knows more than you. People find it difficult, or your spouse. People in the world find it difficult to listen to something other than their own feelings. But the irony of that statement is that you will feel. If you ignore good practices and good advice, and you do something ill-advised, you know, you will feel. I watch videos. I was watching someone driving. You watch people driving on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and they're driving, and sometimes they're driving really fast cars, and they're not wearing seatbelts. Like it's the 1950s. They're not wearing seatbelts, and it's like, you know, why? Why would you not wear a seatbelt? You know, just the volume of accidents I've survived and always had a seatbelt on, you know, wheels falling off of pickup trucks. Well, that time I was in the back of the pickup truck and I did not have a seatbelt on. But the times I've been inside a car, the times I've been
Jed clamping in the back of the doggone pickup truck.
Well, yeah, that the times I've been inside a motor vehicle when someone else struck it, I had my seatbelt on. But you know, you still hear stories of people not having their seatbelts on and leaving the vehicle, and it's like the car had 10 airbags, but that didn't help you because you exited the vehicle because you didn't have a seatbelt on, or you went through the windshield, or something else horrific. But yeah, who can't hear must feel, and I think that is there's dozens, if not hundreds, of Jamaican proverbs. That's probably my favorite one because it's true all the time.
Hell yeah, man! Let me tell you how hard-headed people are. There's these things, people, they warned us for years, right? Don't be driving with your cell phone in your hand. Don't drive and text. Don't drive and talk. Mm-hmm. And people still did it. And people kept doing it until eventually most states have a law. Now it's, even if you don't get in the accident and something negative or bad happens to you now,
you can't have it in your hand.
You can't have it in your hand, you know? And you know why they do that? Because who can't hear must feel. Because the warning is out there. The data shows that people who drive with a cell phone in their hand are more likely to be distracted, which makes them increasingly more likely to be in an accident.
Yep.
And I still to this day see people driving around with their doggone phone in their hand. And you know what? They're usually the person that's going slower because they can't do two things at one time. Don't you hate when you're in the left-hand lane behind somebody and they're going like 10 miles slower than the speed limit and everybody's passing them on the right and you finally get around them and this is what you see?
Yep.
I'll be wanting them to feel right then and there. Sometimes I'll be wanting to issue the feeling. You know what I mean?
That's why the old Uncle Jesse truck from Dukes of Hazzard ramming people off the road.
I swear, man. But yeah, man. People, you know, no wiser words really can be spoken. You know, like it's real talk. Like when people tell you something, or they warn you of something, take heed, because you never know. Murphy's Law is real. And what does Murphy's Law say? That if it can happen, it will happen. But Brooklyn, you picked a great one today, bro. You even took us to the Caribbean. Big up Jamaica. Yeah, man. But I was thinking about this particular phrase, man, and we're getting close to the end. Unless you got something you want to add on.
No, wrap it up.
Yeah, you know how I'm always having these questions that we got to think about. A couple of them I wrote down, and you've kind of already asked one, which is, can you recall a time when ignoring advice led you to learn a hard lesson? I think we can all speak to that. And also, we spoke about this. What made you choose to not listen at that time? We said ego, we've said pride, we've said all kinds of other things. And have you ever been on the other side giving advice that was ignored? I have, mainly as a parent, but even as a friend. Don't date that girl. We all know who that girl is, and we listen and we don't listen anyway. But think about this in your quiet times, y'all. Is feeling the consequences always a negative, or can it be a valuable teacher? I would say that there are times when it is, in fact, the only teacher.
Yeah. I mean, I've always held that it's better not to learn every lesson yourself, right? Like, if people are like, hey, every time somebody walks up D Street at 5 p.m., they get shot. 15 people have been shot. You have a choice. You can not walk down D Street at 5 p.m., or you can think that you're invincible, or you want to be the first person not to get shot on D Street at 5 p.m. But more than likely, you're going to end up the 16th person shot on D Street at 5 p.m. But some people make that choice. People have free will, and if they don't hold the person giving them advice in high enough esteem, then they might do that anyway. Or you have now you have what's called the ask hole, ASKHOLE, where they're going to ask you a bunch of questions. You're going to tell them what they need to know, and they're going to do what they were going to do anyway.
That sounds like me.
That
sounds like me back in the day. You used to always tell me that, Mo, you will ask me a question, I will give you my advice, and you will do it anyway.
I did not want to name names. All the time. I didn't want to name names specifically. But yeah, there have been times when I laid out the path of destruction, and you were like,
and I walk on that bitch.
I'm gonna go down that path. Who can stop?
And I was walking down that bitch. I was just like headed to destruction.
That is funny. Yeah, so it's a worthy topic, and we can sit here many decades in and sit in our high horse, high chair, sit on our thrones, with the with all these decades of experience, and be like, yeah, we know better. Well, we didn't always know better. So we didn't always know better. We didn't always necessarily do better. But that's what life is about, learning. And if you're fortunate, who can't hear must feel will happen, and you'll live through. Because sometimes what people feel is a brick wall, or falling out of the sky, or a bungee cord snapping, or
or a bullet,
or a bullet. I was gonna say an anvil,
Timberland,
right? So yeah, that's what it is. Good talk.
Facts. Yeah, man. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was a great discussion. I'm glad we picked this for you guys to hear from us. By all means, heed the warning, ladies and gentlemen. If you're lucky enough to make it to 50, like both of us have, and the reason why I say luck, because there was often times where we just did not listen. You know, why were we driving, a Beretta in the middle of the night, after some of us were drinking and decided the main drinker should drive? Why would I do that? when we all knew better, But we were fortunate to survive these. And the reason why people tell you stuff is usually because they care about your well-being. So it would behoove you to at least give it some consideration that maybe they're speaking to you and providing information from a good place. You know what I mean? But I think that's all we got. I don't think there's anything else to say. As we say in the Marine Corps, I think we pretty much broke that thing down shotgun style.
I agree.
Yeah, man. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on. And we just wanted to let you guys know that we appreciate your time for making it this far. We just ask that you take 3 seconds and click the like button. And not only that, hit the subscribe button, because we want to be able to get good information out, because there's a lot of talk going on right now on the internet, and not a lot of it is for edification and building each other up. So we started this podcast because we wanted people to have a reference point for learning and lessons and just putting wisdom inside their minds. And believe it or not, just like Brooklyn said earlier, sometimes wise words come to you in another voice or in your own voice, but you had to have heard it at least first.
Right.
So we're going to continue to give you phrase to make the memorization of these lessons easy, because we could have came on here and just gave you a whole sentence saying this, but instead we got a phrase which is who can't hear must feel. Well, look, I'm Mo Better, aka Mo Riley, aka Mr. Act Like It. I got my brother right here, Brooklyn Taylor, the philosopher, a scholar and a gentleman. And we appreciate your time. And don't forget to leave a comment if you got something to say. If you disagree, tell us why. If you agree, tell us why. If you don't like it,
share
hit the like button anyway. And share
this video. Of course, like Mo said, like and subscribe. Share this. This may come. The universe provides, as my cousin Orville always says. Shout out to him. This may be something that helps someone. So share the video, and maybe someone will realize that they've been getting advice that they need to heed before it's too late. And who can't hear must feel. Thanks for tuning in.
And on that note, we are signing off. Appreciate you, bruh. Until next time, eye for an eye, y'all.
Eye for an eye.
Peace.
Peace.